Alright everyone, so we just had one of the most surprising and confusing chapters in One Piece history that throws a lot of our preconceived notions out the window. So to begin with, let's just start with what we got out of Shanks and Gaban and the information that we gained about the Holy Knights. So apparently the answer to the long-standing mystery of how to deal with the regeneration that the Gods Knights and the Gorosei have been displaying is simply more Conqueror's Haki. Just keep using Advanced Conqueror's Haki coding and it will do the trick. Now this does raise some very curious questions, which is, why was Luffy not able to damage the Gorosei back at Egghead? Because this opens up a few different avenues for answers. One, maybe Luffy was using Advanced Conqueror's Haki, but the Gorosei's regeneration is stronger than the Gods Knight's regeneration, which would make sense to some degree because the Gorosei have a higher level packed with Imu than the Gods Knights do. They have the deep sea level contracts. In which case it would make sense why Luffy, despite using Advanced Conqueror's Haki, was not able to stop their regeneration. Alternatively, maybe the Gorosei and the Gods Knights have the same degree of regeneration, but Luffy wasn't able to put out as much Conqueror's Haki as Gaban did against Sommers, considering he is just basically 1 or 2 arcs away from having to reach Joy Boy's level of Haki, but you never know in One Piece. And then the final possibility that this opens up is that Luffy just simply was not using Advanced Conqueror's Haki in Egghead, which would basically throw out everything that we saw from Luffy in Egghead, from his fights with Lucci, to the Seraphim, to Kizaru, to Saturn, to the other Gorosei, so on and so forth. And if that sounds insane, just keep in mind that in Egghead, we saw Zoro struggle with Rob Lucci for a lot longer than people expected him to, only for us to then learn 1 arc later in Elbaf that turns out Zoro didn't actually have a proper handle on how to use his Advanced Conqueror's Haki, hence his longer than expected bout with Rob Lucci makes a lot of sense in retrospect. All I can say is that this chapter, perhaps more than any other chapter in recent memory, has just made me feel like it is so important for Oda to give us some sort of better indicator of when characters are definitely using Advanced Conqueror's Haki or not. Because at this point, it's just getting a little absurd. It's not like power scaling needs to suddenly become the end-all be-all thing that he needs to explain in great detail every single chapter, but I don't think you can have it both ways, where on the one hand, you don't want to explain the power system or the cues of what's being used in the power system that well, but at the same time, the intricacies of the power system turn out to actually be very, very impactful for the plot. I feel like Oda has to kind of pick a lane, and I think that it's possible that something simple that happened post-Wano is that post-Wano Luffy is coming out of the arc as this sort of Yonko-level Advanced Conqueror's Haki monster who can clash and split the sky evenly with other Yonko like Kaido, and you've also got Zoro, a Yonko first mate who can actually use Advanced Conqueror's Haki, and I think Oda was kind of like, well, hold up, we can't have these characters tapping into this extremely powerful ability too fast before we get to the final war, so they were perhaps simply written to be less competent than they could be over the course of Egghead. Maybe that's not the explanation. As I said, there are 3 options that could kind of explain what happened in Egghead, but I would not be surprised if Oda felt that he had made some of his main characters a bit too strong too fast, and then simply had them not use their powers to the best of their abilities for an arc just to make the plot work. I mean, I remember there was a point in Egghead where you had Luffy and Zoro just struggling with 2 child Seraphim, literally unable to damage them, despite 1 arc prior being able to damage Kaido and being implied to be capable of damaging King. And now in Egghead, they're acting like this is a huge roadblock, and it's kind of just like, okay, what are we doing here? It feels like a very contrived situation if these characters actually can damage their opponents perfectly fine, but they're simply being written to not do it. So all I can say is that I hope that that is not what Oda is doing here, and that we don't just get rolling into the Elbaf arc and Luffy just announces something like, okay, I'm going to start using Advanced Conqueror's Haki again, or he has some sort of reflection on how to tap into his Advanced Conqueror's Haki again because he wasn't doing that post-Wano. But you know, we'll just wait and see, because that's already been established to be the case for Zoro. I wouldn't be that surprised if it turns out to be the case for Luffy.
But before we get into it, it's time to lose your shit, because we are doing a huge holiday sale where you can buy 2 posters and get 4 free. That's right. Buy 2, get any 4 free. And we mean any 4 because for this December only, we are bringing back all our poster collections. All the island posters, all the ships posters, and of course all our boss posters. And we even have new posters for these collections. Maxim, the Sea Train, Ace's Ship Striker, Garling, Shamrock, and for December only, we have the Skypiea version of Going Merry and Dami Reversi Rocks. Just mix and match any posters you like from across all collections, and the huge discount will be automatically applied at checkout. After this December, the whole deal goes away, along with the Going Merry and rocks. Lastly, congratulations to Just.MeJ3Z for winning an entire collection for free as part of our One Dream Studio Instagram giveaway. You can follow our Instagram page to automatically be entered into future giveaways.
Then, as we saw with Shanks and Gaban, they were able to, of course, both use Advanced Conqueror's Haki against Harold, but it simply wasn't enough. And considering this is the version of Shanks that Mihawk presumably defeated in order to become considered the world's strongest swordsman, and considering this version of Scopper Gaban is probably not too far off from his prime, Harold just powering through their attacks right here, and these two characters being completely unable to impede him in any way, is kinda crazy, because both of these characters should be at least Admiral level at this point in time, at minimum. I will say that I appreciate Oda filling in a sort of little mini plot hole that readers have been somewhat complaining about, which was how did Sommers know Scopper Gaban? Because it was revealed that the Holy Knights have actually had plenty of encounters with the Roger Pirates in the past. So I like that little bit of lore being filled in, and it explains how the Roger Pirates have so much experience dealing with the immortality of the Holy Knights. At the same time, it is established that it appears that at least the God's Knights that the Roger Pirates fought before did not have Conqueror's Haki, which isn't surprising, so long as Garling is not part of that equation. Because if Garling doesn't have Conqueror's Haki, then he would pretty much be the only Gorosei who doesn't have Conqueror's Haki. So here again, we have three options. Either one, Garling has Conqueror's Haki, and he was simply never one of the members of the God's Knights that the Roger Pirates encountered. Two, none of the Gorosei originally had Conqueror's Haki, but they gained it once they gained a greater bond with Imu with the Deep Sea Pact. Or three, Garling genuinely is the only Gorosei who doesn't have Conqueror's Haki, and he's actually the weakest of the Gorosei at this point in time. So again, confusing chapter that puts a lot of things into question, but we haven't even gotten to the crazy stuff yet, which is the squirrel. So let's get straight what just happened here. In the span of about 5-10 pages, we get the reveal that, yes, there is in fact a forbidden ultimate fruit of Elbaf that is not the Nika Nika fruit, but it has never been able to be eaten because it has been protected by this hammer, and the hammer is sentient because the hammer is part squirrel. It is presumably either a squirrel that has eaten a hammer fruit or a hammer that has eaten a squirrel fruit. And of course, it's only in One Piece that the sentence, a hammer that ate a squirrel fruit to become a sentient half squirrel, half hammer, makes any sort of sense. But it is, of course, possible. In Norse mythology, there is a squirrel known as the Ratatoskr. I probably am not pronouncing that correctly, but interestingly, it has nothing to do with lightning. So either Oda is taking some creative liberties with what that mythological squirrel can do in the context of One Piece so that it can produce lightning, or there's something more to how this whole explanation of how the squirrel, the hammer, and the lightning concepts all tie together in one. What we know for sure is that Oda wanted to give Loki a special weapon that was also its own sentient living being to sort of give Loki a companion piece so that it's not just Loki by himself in battles from here on. We can consider it a sort of duo every time of Loki and his sidekick, the Hammer Ragnar. I think that's a really interesting and cool concept, and I've already really been liking Loki as a character. I think that alone makes his fighting style all the more interesting. I hate that Oda is hiding his fighting style from us right here and sort of teasing it for a future reveal, because what better way to showcase Loki's full powers debuting for the first time than fighting against his father, currently the most powerful being in the world outside of Imu himself. Like, this battle is Loki's biggest W in the story that we know of. And the frustrating thing is that we've been told that in the modern day, Loki is going to be nerfed. He is severely injured and is supposedly going to take a month to recover. So unless some special healing is brought out right this second in the current arc, I feel a little frustrated that we were just deprived of getting to see what Loki can really do right here against Harold. Now, for the fruit itself that Loki ate, we know that it's an extraordinarily powerful fruit. It is supposedly one of two fruits, according to rocks, that are necessary to bring down Imu and changing the world. So presumably, it is a fruit that is comparable in power, at the very least, to the Nika fruit, which is pretty insane. From the looks of it, it may very well be the Fenrir fruit because it takes a sort of dark black form and seems to have claws. And we know that the people of Elbaf believe in the Fenrir because that is one of the fears that manifested through Killingham's abilities earlier in the arc. I think it was just never established that the Fenrir is like the end-all be-all destructive force according to Elbaf. So I'm a little surprised if it is the Fenrir fruit that it would be considered this powerful that it can bring the end of the world, but Oda can always introduce new information to us. And from what we see, Loki gives his dad a great fight. You can interpret this fight many ways, but at least to me it appears that if Harold did not have regeneration, that Loki may have just been able to beat him outright now that he has the new fruit. And all of this has crazy implications for Loki's own power, because it appears that Loki, even without the fruit and even without the hammer, may genuinely be comparable to his father Harold, who himself was the equal of Rox, the greatest pirate in history. If we consider that Harold with Emu's buff and Loki with the ultimate devil fruit were also shown to be about equal, then that puts Loki in some crazy conversations in terms of just how strong he is in the grand scheme of One Piece characters. And then if we add in Ragnar, which is also just this basically insanely, ludicrously powerful living weapon that in itself is supposedly comparably powerful to Harold and Loki, then Loki's full kit of abilities with his own haki, this broken devil fruit, and this absurdly broken weapon that is comparable to him himself in strength, all of it together makes Loki this insane Frankenstein's monster amalgamation of powers in the One Piece universe like nothing we've ever really seen before. Which is, again, why I'm very disappointed we did not really get to see him go all out over the course of this fight. So I don't know what Oda is still really saving him for, because this would be an amazing scene to debut everything Loki can do. Ultimately, I don't think Oda really wants to make any of his favorite top-tier characters look bad. So again, the fight ends not with Loki triumphantly defeating Harold, but rather the fight being inconclusive and Harold basically stopping himself and saying that, okay, I will let you get a free hit on me while I still have control over myself. And that's when we get to see this crazy combination of abilities by Loki, where he summons an absolutely gigantic bolt of lightning and combines it with Conqueror's Haki lightning for probably one of the strongest attacks in One Piece history, considering it was able to single-handedly overcome Emu's regeneration entirely and kill his father, who himself is one of the strongest characters in One Piece history. And for those of you who want a real idea of just how powerful Ragnar's lightning is, if you go back to when earlier in the arc Loki struck the Elbaf tree and brought down lightning with Ragnar, Ragnar's lightning legitimately dwarfs entire mountain ranges. It makes Enel and Big Mom's largest lightning attacks look absolutely minuscule in comparison, except of course for the Raigo, which was amped by Maxim and not Enel's organic lightning. So Ragnar, from what we've been shown in the past, is essentially a weapon of mass destruction, which makes sense as to why none of Elbaf's kings in the past have been able to get past Ragnar and eat the fruit. Even Loki himself didn't truly seem to defeat Ragnar, rather Ragnar stepped aside because he deemed Loki worthy and allowed him to eat the fruit. So a lot going on this chapter. I truly wish that we got to see more of Loki fight. I will say that the final send-off between Loki and his father, not the most emotional scene for me personally. I appreciate a lot of what's going into it, and I think that Harold's character arc, read from start to finish, is a really, really unique one in One Piece. You can read the start of his story, where he essentially ends by telling the humans arrogantly, "Who's your god now?" And then we see this whole character arc of growth where he grows to humble himself and treat humans with respect and stop believing he's above everybody else, only to then fall prey to Emu's power, and then that dark side of him starts to slowly come out, and as he says this chapter, I began to believe I was God. It is a very tragic story in that it goes full circle, from the starting point of believing that he is God, the growth, but all of that essentially being erased, and him coming full circle again to feeling like he is God, all due to his own naivety. He does ultimately regain control and come to his senses at the most important moment, and stays true to his genuine self, the pacifistic, humble self that does not place himself above anybody else, and wants only for Elbaf to prosper. And that is ultimately what matters for him, but at what cost? He's already killed the entire army of giants. At the end of the day, Harold's death is not going to be remembered as one of One Piece's iconic, sort of beloved character send-offs, but rather a really dark and tragic story of a man who had good intentions, but ultimately went down a very complicated path that left him in a very muddy place at the end of all things. And I think that's one of the really cool things about the Rox and Harold flashback in general, in that it's not one of those traditional One Piece beloved character death flashbacks that we're used to, where we get these beautiful send-offs. Rather, both of their deaths are very dark in their own way, and they don't elicit these sort of tears and sense of heartbreak from us as readers, but rather a sense of deep discomfort in seeing how these characters go out. So while ultimately this flashback doesn't elicit the same emotions as I'm used to from many One Piece flashbacks, sometimes that's a good thing. Oda went into a very different direction with the two characters of Rox and Harold, and told very compelling stories with both, and I think that's what really matters. But at the end of the day, if I was supposed to feel something really deep and profound from Loki and Harold's send-off, I really didn't. I think what I will feel for is probably in the next chapter, Loki choosing to take the blame and the hate from all the giants for his father's death, when ultimately he is truly innocent. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And hopefully we get a little bit more wrap-up of what happens with Loki after all of this. His years at sea, maybe a glimpse of his battle with Shanks presumably having gotten a lot stronger later on, unless that whole storyline of Shanks taking out Loki was also a lie. We still just have more to uncover with this character, but I'm guessing we get maybe 2 more chapters after this, which would basically put the entire flashback at a total of 20 chapters, which is a nice, neat number that Oda might be shooting for. And finally, we have the voice of the people from my top tier of patrons. So Justin Holland said, if this flashback helps reinforce anything, despite not even being 20 yet, Luffy's character sensing skill is second to none, even to Whitebeard. Yeah, I think it's really cool that Luffy's just able to see through to the core of Loki's character and recognize that he is ultimately a good guy, despite what all the giants Spellbath have said about him and him being chained up and everything. So I'm sure that Luffy and Loki's dynamic is going to be one that I really enjoy once we get back to Elbaf itself. But for the moment, I think we got a bit of a break ahead of us. I enjoyed this chapter overall, but I do wish we'd gotten a little bit more, and it does ultimately leave me with a lot of questions. So overall, I'm going to give this chapter an 8 out of 10. And with that, I will talk to you all next week.